when I lived in Thailand, one of the hardest things was not knowing how to be polite. I wanted to be polite and just wasn't sure what the right thing was to do and ended up offending a lot of people, I'm sure, accidentally. So here's some tips for learning how to be polite in a culture that you're learning the language of. So the first thing is that politeness is cultural. I'm going to say that again. Politeness is cultural. There are certain things that are rude in my culture that are polite in someone else's culture, and vice versa. I can't tell if I just see someone doing something. I can't automatically judge, especially if that person's from another culture. I can't judge. I'm not in a position to judge whether that person is being polite or rude, because a lot of times those are opposites in different cultures. So I'm going to share a couple of my faux pas in Thailand of learning about Thai culture. So the first thing is that in Thailand, kind of traditionally, rather than waving or shaking hands, the kind of traditional way to greet is to wai, like this. But the thing that I didn't learn until I was there for a little while is that where you put your hands makes a really big difference. So the higher you put your hands, the more respect it shows. So when you wai to the king, you are on the ground with your hands above your head. If you're waiing to someone who's inferior, then your hands are down here. So I didn't know better, so I was just waiting to people like this, and one of my senior colleagues was like, like, get your hands up by your nose. Nose is safe. Nose is safe. Something else that was really different in Thai culture that I didn't expect was how different clothes culture could be. So in Thailand, it is much more important to dress formally. Now, I grew up in several places that had a much more casual culture of clothes, but in Thailand, it's not like if you're teaching undergrad at my university, and I think this is more representative, you're wearing a dress shirt, you're wearing a tie, like you are dressed up. Whereas in like even a lot of my none of my undergraduate professors and none of my graduate professors like dressed up like that at all. So it was really different for me teaching there, kind of the clothes culture. I also learned that modesty is different culturally. So there's clothes that were considered modest in Thailand that wouldn't be in America, and vice versa. So like in Thailand, it's really important to have your shoulders covered. So like, thin straps are in a lot of contexts would be fine in America, but would not be considered modest or polite in most contexts in Thailand. Whereas in Thailand and Southeast Asia in general, like wearing skin-tight clothes is not considered as immodest as in a lot of places in America. Something else, a third thing about Thai culture that was really different for me to get used to is that if you have a disagreement or if you have to give kind of negative feedback to someone, a common way to do it in Thailand is to talk to their superior or another person to tell that person rather than telling that person directly. And so this is to kind of allow that person to save face so that you aren't telling them, oh, you did this wrong. You tell someone else and then they can hear it from someone else rather than from you directly. So this is something else about Thai culture that was difficult for me to get used to. It felt really rude to me as an American and just my own kind of culture that I grew up in. It's like, if I'm doing something wrong, if you have a problem with me, like, come and tell me directly. But that's not the way that things are normally done in Thailand. So that would be an example of something that felt impolite to me that actually was polite in that culture. That person was trying to be polite. So here's a couple other things that you might encounter in your language learning journey that can be really different from one culture to another. So one is turn taking. When people are having conversations, we talk about them taking turns. One person speaks and then they pause and someone else speaks. And different languages, or I should say it's more part of the culture than the language, but different cultures have different traditions for and how long you pause in between turns. And kind of how you indicate that you're done talking and it's time for the next person to take over. So start paying attention to that. If you find that like people are always cutting you off before you're getting started, it's like it might just be that the turn-taking culture is different than in your own culture. Another one that we see is like how close you speak. Like, do you stand really close to someone? Are you much further back? And that's something that a lot of us may not have ever thought of. We just kind of have a natural distance that we tend to go to until we encounter someone from a different culture who likes to talk either much more close or much further away. And, either where we keep stepping forward and the other person keeps stepping back, or vice versa. So that's something also to pay attention. In the culture that you're studying, how close do people like to be when they're talking? Another area in which cultures differ is in bluntness. Like, how much do you speak around a topic versus how much do you just, are you blunt and just directly approach the topic? And that's another one that can seem, if you're blunt when the culture calls for kind of a roundabout or a circumspect a discussion of a topic, that can feel rude, and vice versa too. So pay attention to that in the culture that you're studying. Something else that's really interesting is that politeness a lot of times can get kind of baked in to be like a formal part of the language in terms of its structure. We don't have a lot of this in English, but one example is that in Spanish and a lot of the other Romance languages, there are two words for you, depending on kind of the, like, how close you are to a person, as well as kind of the power relationship to some extent between them. So those would be like, tú and usted, or, vos or vosotros, or like a lot of other Romance languages have something based on that, and kind of vos meaning you. And that's the more formal one. So with your friend, you probably use tú. With a professor or someone that you don't know very well, you probably use, a vos, or vous, or kind of something, depending on which language, kind of from the more formal you. We see this even more in a language like Korean, where not only are there kind of indicators to show formality in kind of which pronouns you use, but also it affects the grammar. And like that a verb has a different ending if you're talking about a teacher doing something versus a student. Like the teacher, if a teacher's doing something, then there's like a respectful suffix that goes on the verb, or like a kind of an indicator that the subject of the verb is kind of a respected individual. And so this is something else that makes languages really interesting. So, for instance, Thai has 3 different registers of language. Like, there's words in kind of 3 different categories. So there's kind of the kind of everyday register, there's a more formal register, and then there's a register that you use when talking to or about royalty. So, for instance, the word to eat, just the normal everyday word, is yin. The more formal word is tan. The kind of kingly word is sewui. So you can see that they don't really have any like clear relationship to each other. They're just 3 totally different words depending on how formal and respectful and you're being, as well as the subject matter. So this is something that a lot of languages have that English doesn't. That is something to kind of pay attention to in the languages that you're studying.